Good to go.
So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Eddie LeMoine. Hailing from Canada, Eddie has established himself as a celebrated author, certified virtual speaker, seminar leader, and corporate trainer with international recognition. His outstanding work has recently been acknowledged with the esteemed TEC Canada Speaker of the Year 2022 award. This accolade highlights Eddie's remarkable influence on Canadian business leaders through consistently impressive ratings, uplifting member feedback, and significant contributions to the TEC Canada business community. Eddie's unparalleled success stems from his unique ability to connect business outcomes with personal growth, motivating individuals to realize their full potential. With an extensive background of over 40 years as a distinguished professional speaker and accomplished business executive, Eddie's firsthand experiences lend credibility and relatability to his presentations. Recognized for his expertise in changing demographics, diversity, performance development, and productivity enhancement, Eddie fosters leadership, employee engagement, attraction and retention, resilience, and the psychology of success. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Eddie LeMoine.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. You know, this is one of my favorite topics to speak about. I've been actually speaking on generations since 2005, and it is probably one of the biggest disruptors in the workplace. In fact, I gave a presentation in Toronto just recently at a fast food, a national fast food company. And they were saying that, you know, like many of you that are out there right now, you probably have 5 generations that come through the doors to work every day. But in their particular case, they actually had 7 generations that walk through the door. So between, you know, the silent generation right to the youngest children that are their clients that walk in the door, it makes this a very, and I don't think there's probably ever been a time in history where we've had that kind of a situation where we have all of these different age groups kind of working and living together. So before we start, I just want to kind of recap a little bit about each of the generations. Then I'm going to get into some of the meat around it, but just so you know where you kind of sit. So mature generation, 1909 to 1945. Baby boomers are 1946 to 1964. I'm actually a baby boomer. I fall in that category. We're going to talk a lot about age. So I'm proud to be a baby boomer, but I don't always identify with them, but I am proud to be a baby boomer. Gen X, 1965 to 1979. Generation Y would be 1980 to 1994, followed by the Z generation, which are 1995 to 2012. And then we have this new generation out there. Right now, they're being called the Alpha generation, but people aren't really sure if that's the name that's going to stick with them. So they may come out with a different name, but 2013 to 2025, some people think they might end up being called the Polar generations. So, but let's get a little bit into it. Now, before we start, I want to do just 3 slides on DEI because diversity, equity, inclusion, one of the big components of diversity is age diversity, and it's one that impacts every single organization. So I just want a couple highlights around DEI and then some things specific to the age part of diversity in the workplace. So at a time when people initially first started looking at DEI strategies within their organization, many of you would probably be similar to this. It might have been because you needed to bid on a tender or you need to tick a box off. But companies now and employees in general that are looking at DEI look at it for a whole different reason. It's much more of a strategic approach to running their businesses. And a lot of that is being driven by what you're all feeling right now, and that's the skill shortage in Canada. And that was a big part of my first presentation I gave in the inaugural speech that I gave for you folks back earlier this year. And that's not going anywhere soon. And one of the things that's driving this shortage of skills right now is obviously the impact of the aging demographics. But here's what we know from a DEI perspective. If you have a nice, strong DEI strategy within your organization, one is it boosts creativity. And the reason why that happens, if you think of it from an employee engagement perspective, engaged employees are employees that have a like-minded goal or emotional attachment to the success of the organization, and engaged employees are inclusive. So it's a big part of building engagement. We know that engagement builds capacity within the organization. It improves decision making in an organization because you have a much more diverse background. So you have more inclusion from that perspective of looking at it from different perspectives. And that can be intellectual or age or gender or culture or better financials. And this is a really interesting one. Companies with strong DEI strategies right now have more cash flow, higher productivity, higher profitability, stronger cost containment, and actually higher safety numbers as well. Talent attraction, which is really what's driving a lot of organizations to look at DEI within their organization right now. When you have a diverse cultural and age organization, it attracts more people of like mind to join the organization. And then obviously it enhances the reputation. But I want to dig a little bit into the age specific part of this DEI. So here are some things when you're looking at DEI from an age perspective, is when you're giving recognition, that you give recognition based on the value that people bring to the table on their age. The other thing we're going to learn through this presentation is different age groups actually require different levels of recognition within your organization. Now, it's hard for me to sit here and not have some kind of unconscious bias, because we're actually going to be talking about different generations and what are the characteristics of the generations. So what I'm going to talk about is rooted a lot in science. You know, what we know a generation is based on when they were born. But you have to be very careful of ageism. You know, all young people are lazy. All old people don't know technology. Old people don't like change, and so on. So be very, very conscious in your organization of what your perception is. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, I may help change that perception a little bit. That your development within your organization is very inclusive, that you include people from all age groups in your training programs and so on. Intergenerational monitoring. I believe that every single, and in fact, when I look at generation training now, what I always say to people is you want to look at the value each generation brings and how do you leverage the individual value. So even when we talk with generations today, I want you to be looking at what are other generations. You have to be kind of know about yourself, but what are other generations looking for? Now, intergenerational mentoring really means that different generations help other generations. So for example, and I believe that, you know, I'm 61 years old. I believe I have a responsibility as a baby boomer to pass my knowledge down to other generations. But for the first time in history, more knowledge is being pushed up from younger generations to older generations than ever before. So sharing technology and those types of things. Flexible workplaces, that we create an environment that works for everyone. And that can be everything from accessibility to comfort and so on. Fair recruitment, that when you're wording your ads to hire people, they're not worded in a way that they become age specific, that they're open to you know, different age group, unless you're specifically targeting a certain age group, like we see in the hospitality industry, where people are maybe targeting baby boomers, encouraging them to make a curtain call or coming back into the workforce or something like that. Tailored benefits, you know, somebody that's 60 years old would require something completely different than somebody that's 21 years old. Somebody 21 years old, you know, is probably paying off some student loan debt, or maybe they're saving for their education, or they want to get married. For them, the paycheck might be more important. For somebody that's later in their life, health benefits and something like that may be more important. But depending on the age, that could vary. Promote inclusivity within your organization when it comes to age. So really embrace that, you know, multiple generations working together in the workplace. Feedback channels, it's really interesting. I've read about 125 employee engagement surveys of Canadian companies over the last number of years. And one of the ones that really bubbles to the top right now is that employees feel they're not being communicated with. So when we're kind of building feedback channels within our organizations, or even communication channels in general, you want to make sure that you're building them based on making sure that every generation is open to communicating. Like, for example, I'm really comfortable with email. my 20-year-old children would be more comfortable with WhatsApp or instant messaging. So the method they're going to look to see data move around within an organization is going to be different than mine. I'm comfortable picking the phone up. My son would want to instant message me. And then awareness training of what each generation brings within the organization. So let's kind of dig into this a little bit. So yeah, I get this question all the time. I literally got it at a Starbucks lineup the other day and it was really, I was talking to my wife and we were talking about skill shortage and somebody behind me said, well, where did everybody go? So I'm going to go through a set of slides that I actually covered some of these slides in my first presentation, but it's a great lead in. And even though the slides are the same, the content I'm going to discuss is going to be a little bit different as we kind of go through it. So this was basically the last 100 years. And if you looked at it as hiring based on age, so we would always hire junior staff, which were normally younger people, and we would promote them within the organization. So junior staff would get promoted to mid-level management or technical resources or nurses or doctors or school teachers or whatever industry it happens to be. And then eventually they would get promoted into senior level within their organization and they would retire. Right now, if we kind of look at that, our junior staff coming in the door right now would probably be the Z generation, mid-level would be millennials, senior would actually be almost X generation now, oddly enough, and retirement would be the baby boomers. This is what it looked like for the last 100 years. You basically couldn't go wrong as a manager. There's tons of people out there. You had to hire someone, you just ran an ad. Well, this is kind of what it looks like when you were trying to hire people in Canada right now. If we look at new hires right now in Canada, there's two different groups that you're obviously going to hire from. One is going to be immigration. And I mentioned this in an earlier presentation I gave, but every single new net job in Canada now, so every new job that's added to the Canadian workforce is actually going to be filled by somebody who's currently not living in our country. So we don't have enough Z generation entering the workforce to offset the amount of baby boomers that are going to be leaving. Millennials have found their way. They're the young executives. It's hard pressed to find something negative about a millennial right now. XGeneration have been disproportionately promoted because baby boomers like them because they look the most like them. And obviously baby boomers are heading off onto their retirement. So I just want to walk you through these few slides just so you really get a sense for this. And what I want you to look at here is the perspective of where baby boomers have been in their lives and the impact it's having right now, but who's coming behind that. So when you're looking at hiring people, that you kind of look at, what age group is out there that I can be looking at hiring. And when we get to the end, maybe it is baby boomers. Maybe you're looking at bringing baby boomers back as a curtain call in your industry as well. Now, the other thing you have to realize is that in Canada, we have one of the highest per capita baby boom populations in the world. Now, we don't have the highest baby boom population. We have the highest per capita baby boom population. So we were kind of the friskiest group of people after the war. So let me just walk you through it, just so you kind of get a sense for this. And what I really want you to kind of wrap your head around here is there was a set of things we really believed that baby boomers were going to do. There was a set of circumstances. And the one thing that baby boomers have always done is not what they were supposed to. All the way through their careers, where we thought they would be or what we thought they would do, they haven't done. In fact, Census Canada was on CBC when I was driving in the car not that many months ago, and they were talking about this, how baby boomers have gone through their lives, and they said they never did what they were supposed to do. And then she almost alluded that they weren't dying fast enough, and the pressure that's going to put on the healthcare system. So let me just kind of walk you through it. So in the 1950s and 1960s, baby boomers were under the age of 14 years old. So we had to build tens of thousands of schools and pediatric wards, baby food manufacturing facilities. And we built all this stuff for this baby boomers because they were massive in numbers. And then in the 1960s and 1970s, baby boomers kind of started to find their way. They some went to post-secondary education, but not everyone did. And it wasn't something that they necessarily needed to do, but they entered the workplace. Now, baby boomers, when they entered the workplace, in their lifetime, on average, they probably changed their careers 3 times. So, and some of you can point to your parents or your grandparents, and maybe they went to work for the power company and they worked for the power company their whole life. My dad went to work for Sears and he was 15 years old. He actually lied about his age because you weren't allowed to work when you're 15. He went to work when he was 15 years old at Sears. And because he did lie about his age, and they eventually did find that out, he retired with a full retirement at 54 years old. So baby boomers kind of went. Now your children are going to be very, very different. So if we look at Z generation and Y generation right now, they're not going to be like that. In fact, baby boomers kind of, they went to post-secondary school around this time in their life. They went to work, they got married. Some of them got married a couple of times. They maybe changed their jobs. At 65 years old, they're going to retire and they're going to go home and eventually die. So, but anyone that's a baby boomer out there is probably not very enlightening what I'm telling you, but the next generations behind that are going to be very different. Your children will be very different. And this is the moving target when you're trying to recruit and hire younger people in your workplace. So younger people are obviously at this stage of their life, 15 to 24 years old, are actually going to go to post-secondary school of some sort. It's kind of like the new high school. So they're either going to go to technical school or university or a trade or something. It kind of is the necessity. And then they might go to work, or they might go to Europe and find themselves, or Australia. And then they're going to come back and they are going to go to work. And then you're going to get a phone call. Some of you may have already gotten one. It might happen a little bit down the road, and it's going to go something like this. Mom, Dad, you know that nursing degree I have? Oh, we're so proud of you, dear. You're contributing back. We tell all our friends that you're a nurse. We're just so proud. Yeah, that's what I'm calling you about. You know what? I think I'd like to do something different. And they're going to go back to school, and you're going to pay for that. And they're going to change their careers, not their jobs. They're actually going to change their careers multiple times in their life. They might take a sabbatical. They could take a few years off. I have somebody in my neighborhood here who just spent a year traveling around the world with their children. So very, very different and moving target. And the other thing to think about, Z generation, Y generation, when they're entering your place of employment right now, the average turnover of a Z generation entering the place of employment right now is about 18 months. So when you're building your onboarding and those types of things, you have to build that around understanding that this generation is a moving generation, and they're not going to be like the baby boomers. They're not going to stay in your place for a long period of time. In the 1970s and 1980s, baby boomers started to find their way. They started to fall in love. They got married. They started to have children. They moved their way up in the organizations. Now, in the 1980s and 1990s, baby boomers became quite successful. They started to earn good incomes. They started to buy houses. But the thing nobody was thinking about was this generation that's coming behind them. So that's the X generation. Now, we're going to get into the generations, but the X generation was a negative growth generation. And it's the first time in the history of Canada we had a negative growth generation. And interestingly enough, all the G7 countries have the same thing. So if you would look normally at population as kind of a pyramid, always kind of growing as it went down, population now would look a little bit more like a beehive. So we're starting to taper in on the bottom because we now have a declining population. 1.6 children per one female. So in the 1990s and 2000, this was the year when baby boomers started to do things that people thought they should have done, but they didn't do. And one of the things they did do here was they started to spend money like drunken sailors. And they spent so much money that they drove interest rates in the double digits. So when we look at, our interest rates now, here it was very significant. If you look behind, you'll see the X generation is a negative growth generation. Then behind that, you'll see the millennials, and then followed by that would be the Z generation. It's a growing generation. So it's the next kind of little baby boomer would be the millennials. And that's why there was talk on it today on CBC about the voting block, how important that young vote is, because it's actually a sizable group of people that are coming behind. Now in the 2000s to 2010, this is when baby boomers didn't do what everyone expected them to do, and that was that they would downsize, that they would move into condos, smaller homes, apartments, and so on. And in fact, they did. And I know some of you that are on this call would probably be in the Ontario market. At the moment, the Ontario condo market really heated up around this time period as baby boomers started to sell their homes and move into condos. But what happened was a lot of them realized this just wasn't for me. I look at my grandmother sitting on the beach at 55 years old. She was an old lady. At 55, she was an old lady. She passed away at at 106. At 106, she looked identical to what she looked at 55. Now I'm 61 years old. I was just mountain biking this morning. I was hiking by a waterfall. So we're much younger. And because of that, they decided they didn't want to leave their homes, and they went back into their homes. And because they stayed in their homes, they started selling them to each other. They priced that housing market right out of the capacity of generations coming behind, and X generations aren't even interested. They are not interested in a big carbon footprint, a big 5 and 6 bedroom house. They're more interested in spending time with their family and their children and so on. So because of that, and nobody was thinking about it at the time in 2000, 2010, it created today's housing crisis. Because the theory was that they would downsize, sell their homes to the X generation would sell their homes to the millennials, and millennials would move out of their apartments or wherever it was, and they would free that up for immigration and Z generation entering the workforce. Let me just go back here for a sec. In 2010 to 2020, where we are right now, the population between the ages of 55 and 64, so that's the baby boomers that are on the cusp of retiring, will increase by about 73%. The population above the age of 65 will increase by 53%. So basically above the age of 65, these are people that have exited the workforce. The population between the ages of 55 and 64, which is very, very sizable right now, they're the next group of people that are exiting at a rate of about 8,500 Canadians are hitting retirement age every single week right now. But if you look behind at what you have as a skill set that you're trying to hire from, it's very, very small. And the area where you can get a little bit of traction right now is going to be that 15 to 24-year-old, so the Z generation, and still the millennial. They're still are sizable. So the more you can attract into your industries, the better it is from that perspective. So all of that, and I always say this, I believe this is the best time to be alive and working in Canada. I believe that there's tremendous opportunity. In my career, and I started my career in the fish processing business, where we would stand around and hope that we would get hired on for a shift that day. And I remember my foreman saying to me one day, Eddie, if you don't like it here, there are 10 people waiting for your job. But your children and your employees will go to their employers, and they'll go to you in the future, and they'll say, if you don't treat me better, there are 4 jobs waiting for me. In fact, the real number is there's about 1.8 jobs available for every person looking for work right now in Canada. So it is really a great opportunity for young people in the workplace right now, but also a great opportunity to be promoted in the workplace as well. So now don't forget, put your questions in the Q&A, and I will come back and we'll do questions at the end. So I do a lot of work around employee engagement. There's 3 steps to closing the engagement gap. The first step is you got to get to know the people you work with. The second step is you have to develop the people you work with. So that's leveraging their individual strengths. And you're going to do that based on their age. And the last thing is I believe that every leader that's on this call, you have to motivate them, that there's that it's your responsibility to inspire. Now, I also believe that it's our responsibility to be inspired in the workplace as well. The only one I'm going to spend time on here, because we've got about 15, 20 minutes left here, is I want to spend time on getting to know people, because that's so critical right now when you're looking at your pool of resources that you're trying to hire into the workplace right now. So when I look at getting to know people, there are 3 things that we look at. The first thing is you got to get to know the people you work with based on their gender. So what are their values, beliefs, home life balance? What are they looking from a gender perspective? Now, prior to 1935 in Canada, wasn't really a lot of, well, I shouldn't say there wasn't as many women working in the workplace. Women really entered the workforce after 1935 when men went off to war. So you'd think, oh, we got this one down. We've been working together for a long time, but you literally have to live under a rock to realize that we still have a long way to go from a gender perspective. But we're not going to spend time on that today. The next one will be from a cultural perspective. Now, when I say culture in getting to know people, we're not talking about good culture in your organization, like an engaged workforce or something like that. In this particular case, we are talking about mostly immigration. So how do we get to know people based on their cultural background, the value they bring from that cultural background? But the one I want to spend some time on right now is age, because it's fun. It's actually fun. I get to poke a little bit of fun at every generation. And here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the generation that you're not your own. I mean, you know your generation. And I do a lot of research around generations. And the thing is that when somebody is born, there is a set characteristics based on their age, and it's global. So we are influenced by similar and mostly technology at every area of the world at any given time. So now there's going to be outliers. Like some of you, when I go through the generations, you might be an X generation and identify more with the baby boomers. So you might, and I actually kind of identify with a lot of the characteristics of the X generation. I am actually a baby boomer. So there are outliers, but for the most part, unless you're on this one island, I think it's called Centennial Island. You'd have to Google that, Centennial Island. It hasn't changed in thousands of years. If you ever decide to visit that island, when you land on the beach, they will kill you because they've never let anyone integrate into that island. So they wouldn't know anything about cell phones or electricity or any of that kind of. But the most of us, whether you're coming from West Africa or not, you understand what cell phones are and the internet and so on. So let me kind of, again, walk through the generations. And what I really want you to think about is, how do I understand the generations that I'm not? So if I'm a 65-year-old manager working with a 20-year-old, how do I understand that? Now, I think in many cases, the 65-year-old manager has a bit of an advantage over the 24-year-old manager that's managing the 60-year-old, because they've had more time in their life to kind of work across the generations. In fact, I think the hardest position to be in right now would be that X generation leader. You go to work one day and you've got somebody 60 years old that's reporting to you, and you've got somebody 18 years old that's reporting to you, and you have to figure out how to communicate and work across all those generations. So again, think about the generations mature in 1909, 1945. Baby boomers are still very, very prominent. If they're not really prominent in your place of employment, they are from a customer perspective. So 46 to 64. Gen X, 65 to 79. I've got some cool things to talk with each one of these. Gen Y, 1980 to 1994. Gen Z, 1995 to 2012. And then Alpha generation is 2013 to 2025. Now, some of you that are kind of into this, you will discover that some people vary on this. And I've looked at it in our research, like some might be off, but for the most part, this is the kind of well-recognized distribution of age. So you ever kind of sitting down and you kind of start the Google stuff, and as soon as you start typing something in, it fills the blank on what comes next. I'm sitting in a hotel room and I'm thinking, I'm going to Google each of the generations and see what people are asking about the generation. It's going to kind of give you a bit of a, what's the world think of a generation right now? So when I do, why is the mature generation, it literally one thing dropped down, important. Why are they even important? Well, they kind of are important in Canada right now because they're still a big part of the customer base. They're, in your particular case, they would be the end users of products that you probably produce and sell to the market in Canada. They actually hold a significant amount of wealth. I believe in the trillions of dollars right now. And they're financing many organizations. They sit in the Senate, so they still have a tremendous amount of relevance. It was interesting when I looked at the baby boomers. So why are the baby boomers, and it comes back, called that? Why are they called the baby boomers? Why are they important in the hospitality market? And I alluded to that a little bit at the beginning. In fact, I believe it's Nova Scotia right now is running phenomenal ads to try and recruit the baby boomers back into the hospitality. You have so much to offer and so on. So they've targeted that particular group of people to bring them back in. Why are they important? Well, obviously their size or wealth would create them. Why are they the me generation? It's really interesting that it would come back with me generation, because the baby boomers always thought the millennials were the me generation, but to be totally truthful, it is actually the baby boomers. And when we get into it, you'll kind of see a little bit why. Now, Gen X, I've always find kind of interesting. Gen X is a really small generation. That's why you're the forgotten generation, the lost generation, the baby bust. You're a generation between two large generations. So some even call you the sandwich generation. And the reason why you're the lost generation or forgotten generation is you almost didn't exist. Your parents discovered the birth control pill. So some of you kind of slipped through, but the reality is that you're a smaller group than any generation before you, because your parents are so busy that you were small. Now, the interesting thing about your generation is many of you actually want to divide it into two generations. So you have very small generations, but there's a discontent within the ranks of the X generation, and they want to divide into two different groups. Now, millennials, and this is really interesting, other than the very first thing, considered the category as lazy, it's actually extremely positive because in my travels, and at the very beginning, it said I won an award for this organization called TEC. Well, TEC stands for the Executive Committee. It's a CEO membership coaching organization. A lot of the CEOs that I present to in this group right now are actually millennials. You found your way. You're doing extremely well. You're skilled, your knowledge, but so you're hard pressed to find anything about it. But if you want to look at what people are saying about Z generation, that's what we probably would have said about the millennials a few years ago. So it's always like the last one in the door seems to get the worst rap. So why they're the worst generation, why they call that, why they the dumbest generation. So let me dig into the generations. And again, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the characteristics of the generation you're not. So how do you effectively communicate with them? How do you work with them? What are their values? If they're employees that you work with, what are they looking for? If they're clients that you have, what are they looking for? And I think it's really important that we see it from other people's perspective. We are not going to change a generation. Wherever they were born in a timeline, the influence will make them unique to that group. So mature generation understand duty and sacrifice better than any generation that walks on the planet right now. And the reason for that is they either lived through the Great Depression or they were children of people who lived through the Great Depression or one of the wars. And because of that, they have spent their whole life avoiding scarcity and lack. Now, if you want the true green generation, this is the true green generation. I would go into my grandmother's house and she had a big ball of string in the kitchen because when they bought fresh meat, it was wrapped in brown paper and tied in string, and they saved the paper and they saved the string. They put a pot of tea on in the morning and they brewed that tea all day long. And if you happen to be on this call from Newfoundland, you would cut through that really strong tea at the end of the day with carnation evaporated milk right out of the can, which was also what you used to feed your children at the time as well when they were born. So very, very green generation, reused, recycled everything, never threw anything away. My mother would put the tinsel on the tree and take it off and reuse it every single year. So because of this, they're a very, very loyal generation. They, if your granddad's a Ford man, he's a Ford man till the day he dies. They'll put a Ford logo on the front of his coffin when they bury him. Like there's that level of loyalty. If you shop at the co-op, you'll shop at the co-op your whole life. This generation was actually motivated by fear in the workplace and was bullied. And they were bullied quite, in fact, back then they didn't really have a manager or a leader like we would think of it today. They had a boss, and the boss would be quite hard to work for. So if we kind of look at back then, they didn't have an easy go of it in the workplace, and they really spent their whole life avoiding scarcity and lack. Great savers, paid off their credit cards, didn't carry a lot of debt, and have a tremendous amount of wealth now as a collective generation. Their parents were the greatest silent generation, the lost generation, the ones that came in before them. Their children are Gen X and boomers. They were very, very busy, hard workers. So they didn't have a lot of time with their children. They have time for their grandchildren. So grandchildren would be millennials, Gen Z. They like traditional forms of communication, the telephone, face-to-face conversations, and so on. Now, baby boomers are still relevant and still in the workplace. So matures wouldn't be as relevant or in the workplace, but baby boomers are definitely relevant and in the workplace. And they are the me generation. In fact, the baby boomers are very, very open about their conversation, and they love to share whatever's going on in their life. In fact, you could kind of watch the baby boomers grow up if you were an Oprah fan. When Oprah first started her career, she catered almost exclusively to the baby boomers and the challenges they had. In fact, when Oprah first started, the baby boomers were quite young and they were a bit of a psychological mess. Many experts believe the number one prescribed drug to the baby boomers in their lifetime was Prozac. And it was because the generation was very stressed. They had a lot going on. They were working long hours. They are kind of workaholics. So Oprah would bring an expert in. And many of you know that expert because he got his own 1-hour show, and that was Dr. Phil. And he helped us with their psychological problems. But then, we got our heads on straight. We went off the Prozac and the Valium, and we started to have health problems. So Oprah brought in another expert. Oprah brought in Dr. Oz to help us with our health issues, and Dr. Oz got his own 1-hour show. Now, for those of you that are younger, and it probably happened today at lunch, it's not uncommon that you're sitting down over a lovely meal with a baby boomer, and they'll tell you some disgusting thing that's happened in the part of their body like you care. And it's part of that baby boomers love to share what's going on in their life part of their. Now, there's some very unique characteristics about a baby boomer in the workplace. They believe in being promoted on tenure, so that the longer you're there, the more likely you should be promoted. They really struggled with the whole work from home scenario because they love to see the bum in the seat. They're not really comfortable. What are they doing when they're home? Are they actually working or not working? Now, interestingly enough, even though they don't like, I shouldn't say they don't like, but they struggle more with the work from home scenario. Of all the generations, they were the strongest in the work from home scenario. And a lot of experts believe it's because they built such strong emotional and social networks before the pandemic, because they've been in the workplace longer. They can lean on those in the workplace. So they believe that teamwork is critical to success. Love meetings. Baby boomers love meetings. Baby boomers will literally have a meeting about a meeting. They'll say, let's get together on Friday and come up with the agenda for Saturday's meeting or the next meeting. So their parents were the mature generation or the silent generation, the one we just talked about, or their parents. Their children are Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. So because they're a massive generation, their children span across 3 generations. The grandchildren are Gen Z or Alpha or Pol or whatever. The key with this generation is it's really the time. Time is important to them. The amount of time they put in. I remember walking into my father's house one time and at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he's in a tizzy, and I said, Dad, you seem a little bit upset. He said, there's no paper. He said, the paper should have been here at 10:30. I said, well, what difference does it make, Dad? You're retired. He said, what kind of a racket are they running? They can't even deliver a paper on time. In my day, that never would have happened. So I always tell people that are not the baby boomers, if the baby boomer is your client or it's your boss, show up on time. Because for them, it's a level of disrespect if you don't show up on time. So it's the easiest way to my father would always say, you know what, if being 10 minutes early is being on time. And I'm sure there's lots of baby boomers out there right now that are kind of nodding their head. Like the generation before them, they also understood scarcity and lack. Now, not so much because they experienced it the way that their parents did, but because of the stories their parents told them. So if you look at them from a work perspective, they put work first, geography second. It was pretty easy to transfer this group around, transfer from northern parts of provinces and so on. And they put work first and family second. And something very, very interesting happened when the X generation came along. Everything changed. It's literally like we could draw a line between the generations, between the baby boomers and the X generation. Now, the X generation puts family first, work second, family first, geography second. And there are probably X generations that are on this call right now that couldn't get their children to move out of a neighborhood, let alone to move to another province or maybe move to a more of a remote area. Now, when I say skeptical, reluctant, self-sufficient, you actually didn't like a lot of what you saw the baby boomers do before you. You didn't like necessarily their work ethic. You didn't like the way that the baby boomers treated the planet, their communication style, the corruption. So you had your kind of reasons why you were skeptical about the generations that came behind. You shunned the baby boomers' do or die attitude about putting time in. You're actually more about getting the job done. So you're more of a productivity-based generation. Give me a task to do, I'll do it. I might do part of it at home. I might do part of it from Starbucks, but you're more about getting the job done. You believe in being promoted based on your skill and what you offer an organization. Now, you have some very unique characteristics, and one is you were the first generation to truly embrace social media. In fact, way more than puppy dogs and pussycats. In fact, if you can see that little guitar player there, that's a guitar player from Southern Ontario named David Carroll. A lot of people think he's from Atlantic Canada. He's actually from Southern Ontario. Played in a band called Sons of Maxwell. Great band. Not that famous for being a singer or playing in the band, but he's very, very famous for a YouTube video he put out there called United Airlines Broke My Guitar. Some of you might remember it. He was flying from Halifax to Chicago. He saw them throw his Taylor guitar into the belly of the plane. When he got there, the neck was broke. He went after United Airlines for about a year. And then finally, at the end of the year, then they wouldn't do anything. He said, you know what? I'm going to sing a little song about this and put it up there on that YouTube channel. And they said, good luck with that, Mr. Carroll. So he put it up there. In the first 9 days, 15 million people watched that video. In the long run, they did fix his guitar. They gave $6,000 to a scholarship fund for young aspiring artists, and to use his YouTube video as a customer service training tool, the power of social media. And he ended up writing a book called One Man Takes on the Airline using social media. It was actually published by Hay House, and all the book signings were done in airports. You are a very skilled generation, great leaders, well-educated. You're too small. You are not going to handle what's coming your way as more and more of the baby boomers exit and even then, not all of you want to be promoted as well. So it's not necessarily what you are looking to do. Your parents are silent or boomers. Your children are millennials, Gen Z or polars. And your grandchildren are going to be alpha or post-alpha, which will be the next generation that comes after that. Now, so everyone's savior when we head into the future is actually going to be the millennials. So if we look at the generation right now that can help us the most, both in their massive numbers, but also in their skill level, is going to be the millennials. So how do you aspire to bring in more millennials into your organization and really benefit? Now, I say coddled, idealistic, most managed generation. You're actually a generation that when we talk about these terms, it really doesn't have a lot to do with you as a generation as much as it had to do with your parents. You know, I don't think there's a human resource manager in the country right now that hasn't been contacted by somebody's parents saying you're not managing little Jimmy properly. In fact, I would speak to the human resource managers across Canada, and every once in a while somebody would put their hand up and they go, I got one that tops that. And, you know, I remember probably 7 years ago, the first one puts their hand up and they go, we actually had a parent show up with an interview with their son. And then I had one in Ottawa not that long ago, and he said, we went through all of we were hiring this young gentleman out of university, brilliant. He said, right down to the final interview, it's the job offer interview. We get out to bring him in through the front of the building, and there's an older gentleman with him. We said, excuse me, can we help? And he goes, oh yeah, I'm his dad. He said, oh, congratulations, we're going to hire your son. You just want to sit out here for a little bit. We'll get everything organized and then we'll come back and get you. And he said, no, he said, I'm coming in. He goes, what do you mean you're coming in? He said, my son's brilliant. He said, that's why you're hiring him. And he said, oh no, he certainly is. And he said, well, he said, negotiating a contract, he doesn't know how to do that. He said, I know how to do that. He said, I'm coming in. So really it was about your parents more than about your generation. You're extremely well educated, very technically savvy. You know, we have about, I think, we're heading from 8 Canadians supporting everyone retired to 2 Canadians supporting everyone retired. If we're going to get there, it's going to be with technology. And if we look at who understands the technology better, especially when we start getting into things like AI, it is your generation. If we look at communication styles across the generation, your generation communicates very effectively in a more instant messaging, so WhatsApp or instant. In fact, I think most 20-some-year-olds would tell any company your corporate email system is too slow. Whereas a baby boomer or even an X generation might be more comfortable picking up the phone or sending an email. Your generation would be more around instant messaging. You actually communicate really well across all generations, and it's because you had a really strong relationship with your grandparents. And my children, who were in their 20s, had an outstanding relationship with my parents, better than I had the relationship with my grandparents. My father took my son, put him on his shoulder, carried him around. My mother taught my daughter how to cook and draw and all the fun things they used to do together as children. Your parents are boomers and X generation. So that's the X generation would be very small. Your children are Z and alphas, and then we don't know what your grandchildren are going to be called because you're too young at this point. And the last one, I just want to touch on it. It's or the Z generation, and there is another one after this. Every generation kind of has an addiction. Baby boomers were addicted to work. In fact, it's not uncommon for a baby boomer to say, I put 60 hours in, my kids don't speak to me anymore, my health is failing, my wife wants to divorce me, or my husband. But if you look at the next generation after that, interestingly enough, it was actually the X generation and Y generation are pretty big drinkers. So I know there are some people on this call that are probably in that industry as well. If you look at liquor sales in Canada and the distribution of liquor and what we buy, change from kind of beer and rum to the baby boomers to a very, very diverse. This generation is actually addicted to technology. In fact, there are more addiction centers in the Asian Pacific for this addiction than any other addiction. So, in fact, there's a study done at the University of California, and they had alluded that the average parent spends 35 minutes a week talking to their children in an actual conversation, not putting them in the backseat with an iPad. In an actual conversation, they're spending 55 hours a week on social media. So they're kind of being raised by each other in institutions. Having said that, incredibly technical. They will be a really big advocate to AI as we start to head into more AI, and that's going to come fast and furious. A big generation as well. So really, really talented generation. You want to tap into this one as best as you possibly can. And the one I just want to touch on, because they're not in the workplace yet, and for the most part will be the alpha generation. They are going to be technical beyond our expectation. They're the first generation born just in the 21st century. They have seen unbelievable technical advances in their career, and they basically have grown up with a device in their hand. So again, when we look at AI and those types of things in the future, that generation is going to be strong. I want to just wrap up with a slide, just comparing them, and then I'm going to pop out. We can do a little bit of a Q&A. I see we do have about 6 Q&As up there right now. Matures and boomers versus X, Y, Z, and even alpha, I suppose. Matures and boomers were more influenced by the Great Depression. X, Y, and Z have no memory of lack. Not to say that, some of the X generation out there, you didn't have it a little bit tough. Maybe you had a share a computer with a sibling, or you only had one car parked in the yard. You never had the kind of challenges that generations before you had. Matures and boomers would always link happiness to the future. I'll be happy when this happens. X, Y, and Z are actually more happy to what's driving happiness today. What'll make me happy today? Now, that one is any better than the other, but they are different. So when we're trying to inspire our employees, baby boomers dangling something might have worked. X, Y, Z generation, what are we doing today, would probably have more of an impact. Matures and boomers were motivated by fear. So when Tony Robbins used to say people do more to avoid pain than to receive pleasure, he was actually absolutely correct with matures and baby boomers. Gen X, Y, and Z are actually motivated more by pleasure. So what am I doing today that makes me feel better? So again, not that one is right or wrong, it's just that they're different. Technology resistant when we look at matures and baby boomers, and technology savvy when we look at the other generations. So I'm going to send it back to you guys. Stop sharing, and we've got we probably have a few extra minutes because we started a few minutes late. So, and I'll stay as long as you want. I've got no plans to go anywhere. So, all right, I'm back to you guys.
Perfect. Thanks, Eddie. So we're going to get started with the Q&A portion. Our first question is, due to economic conditions these days, baby boomers may be facing the inability to be able to retire at 65. As an employer, how can you challenge these people to continue in the organization?
That's an interesting question. So, and we would almost think that would be true because, you know, a lot of times I'll joke that instead of the Freedom 55 plan, I'm now on a Freedom 85 plan. But statistically, we actually haven't seen that happening. In fact, during the pandemic, we saw more people retire early than waiting until they were 65. A lot of people who could retire were saying, I'm done. You know, I don't want to be Zooming. This is not the way I want to work. I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable and so on. So we actually saw more baby boomers exit. So, but it's a very good point. And I believe that there is some validity to that there are baby boomers. I mean, if you go down to Florida, half the people that work in Florida are baby boomers that are working so they can enjoy that lifestyle in Florida. So I think you'll see that. I think you'll see people make a curtain call, come back and do something a little bit different. But it's statistically, we're not seeing, and I would have agreed 100% with that question, that's what is happening, that people can't retire, but it's actually not what we're actually seeing in the real numbers. And the other thing too, I want to throw this out there because I'm 61 years old. I have no plan whatsoever to retire at 65. And if you look at the retirement age, if we think of 65 as a retirement age, it was a German economist in the late 1800s that came up with 65 because life expectancy was 48. And they figured if you were alive at 65, you're so incapacitated you couldn't work. Using the same logic today with life expectancy being around 83 in Canada, retirement age should be 94. You know, if we use the same logic we used in the 1800s. So 65 is just way too young for people to exit the workforce. I think it's defined pensions got us hung up on that number, but you really should work as long as you want to, and you have to, or you can.
Perfect. Next question is, what generations do you think clash the most in the workplace, and what are some buffers that can be put in place to ease their relationship?
You know, that's an interest. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I think some of the biggest clashes would have been baby boomers to a younger generation, because baby boomers are so set in their ways. You know, you had to show up at 8 o'clock and you had to stay till 5, and younger people would come in with a different set of attitudes. But when we look at employee engagement surveys, we look at where people are scoring the lowest right now, it's in communication, and it's really more young people feeling that the company isn't communicating well enough with them. So that, and I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, if I asked my father how much the house was, he'd tell me it was none of my business. Or how much is the car payment? Or how much do you make? And our children, you know, and your children will be the same. We tell them everything. You know, we tell them how much money we make, how much the car costs, how much the power bill is. So when they go to work, they expect their employer to share information with them because they had information shared with them growing up. And if you're not sharing information, then they believe that maybe you're hiding something from them or keeping something. So, you know, before the pandemic, the number one trait for building engagement in an organization was to have a high level of trust. And there's been a lot of distrust between younger and older. Interestingly enough, the number one trait for leadership right now is empathy. That was driven by the pandemic. But I think the biggest conflict would have been more between, you know, the baby boomers and probably the millennials. The baby boomers like the X generation because they look like them.
Perfect. Next question is, you spoke about the many career changes for the younger generations. How do employers deal with the fact that a great deal of training and time is spent for little return in the long run?
I love that question. I'm getting it all the time. You know, the average expectancy of a millennial, or well, not so much a millennial, a Z generation when they enter the place of work right now is about 18 months. And I was talking to a CEO in an organization in Ottawa, and he was telling me, he said, Eddie, it's funny you would say that because when we hire people, we hire them for 24 months. I said, what do you mean 24 months? He said, we tell them in the hiring process, give us 24 months. You give us 24 months. We'll work on your resume with you. We'll even help you find your next job if you want. And I said, well, Why would you do that? And there's a couple things that drive this. The time you hire someone right now in your organization till they have buyer's remorse, thinking that they went to the wrong place, is actually 53 hours. So you have a very, very short window from the time you hire people till they might start looking for another job. And the options are there. Like even now with the economy slowing down a bit, we still have, I think, 930,000 open jobs in Canada. So it's still about 1.5 jobs for everybody is out there, kind of looking for it. But the other thing he said when he came back, he said, what we do is we try and build a compelling enough business that they want to stay. So, we say, give us 24 months. And he said it forced us to get our onboarding a lot faster so we get value out of people. Now, a lot of people that are on this call, you can onboard people pretty fast. Your industries may not require a tremendous amount of technology. But if you're in, say, the aerospace industry where onboarding is 3 years, it's a big deal. But, if it's in the processing industry, you can onboard people relatively fast. If you make it compelling enough, they'll stay. And I think that's the key, but there is no alternative. The only alternative right now to this, a very, I don't want to say finicky, but people have such opportunity right now to not stay. The only guarantees you would have right now would be integrating more technology and automation into your businesses in to replace positions where you're having a hard time finding or holding people.
Very good. The next question, we mentioned it briefly in one of the last questions, but what can Gen Z and young millennials do to improve their management style when it comes to managing older generations?
Well, every person, when they go to work, what they really want to do is leverage their individual strengths and align those strengths with the goals of the organization. And that's where we get this emotional attachment to the outcome. And it's where the whole engagement thing really comes from. So every single person, when they walk into work, there are things they enjoy doing. So it wouldn't matter whether you're a baby boomer looking at a millennial or a millennial looking at a baby boomer. What you want to do is identify their strengths and then align those strengths with the goals of the organization. I'm going to give you a simple little exercise. Everyone here can do this. I guarantee you, if you do this little exercise for 15 days, you'll completely change the direction of your company. Have every one of your direct reports. So and most people wouldn't have like a ton of direct reports, but have every one of your direct reports at the end of the day, before they go home, write on a piece of paper. And we're basically taking this right from Marcus Buckingham's Go Put Your Strengths to Work. He's one of my favorite authors. At the end of the day, have them write on a piece of paper, what did I do today that I truly enjoy doing? What did I do today that I dislike doing? Do it for 14 days. And the reason why we do it for 14 days is we want to build a pattern. So if you're younger and you're looking at someone that's older that you're working with, get them to do this exercise. And then think to yourself, okay, here's the goals of my department or my company or my organization. And here's what they identified as their strength, things that made them feel good. Because the strength is a feeling. If you're doing something that makes you feel good, that's a strength, and aligning it with the goal, that's kind of where this whole magic of engagement comes. If you can align more of their strengths with the goal, you'll actually completely change the direction of your organization. Now, in the past, especially with baby boomers would do anything you asked them to do because it was so competitive for them in the job market. So it wasn't as important that they were doing things that they enjoy doing. Millennials, on the other hand, need to be enjoying their work because they have some options. They don't have to stay where they're at. So for them, it's more important that we leverage strengths. I went to my father one time. I said, Dad, I'm looking for a job with purpose so I could use my strengths. And he looked at me and said, suck it up, buttercup, it's work. It's not supposed to be fun. If you want fun, buy a snowmobile. So my father looked at work different than a younger generation was. But it doesn't matter whether you're digging a hole, driving a backhoe. Every single employee, when they go to work, there are things they love to do, or at least enjoy more than the things they dislike doing, and get them to do more of them and align them with the goals of the organization. And believe me, whether you're managing up or managing down, it'll make a big difference. Simple little exercise. Do it for 14 days. I guarantee it'll make a big difference.
It's a good exercise. Our last two questions kind of intertwine with each other. So I'm going to read them out together. So what do you find most challenging about working with multiple generations? And is it worthwhile to create some kind of multi-generational practice model for supervisors and management?
So I actually love working with all generations, and we have clients that we work with that really pride themselves on having people from all different generations. In fact, I spoke recently at the largest fast food organization on the planet's conference in Toronto, and I looked at their audience, and the diversity was amazing. Not just age diversity, but cultural background, immigration, like everything you can imagine. And every speaker that got on the stage was talking some form of DEI because it was so critical to that organization. But I see age diversity as a real benefit to an organization. So I 100% would look at coming up with strategies around working across multi-generations, and not so much that you're trying to tick a box off. I want 4 millennials and 1 X generation and throw in a couple of baby boomers. Look at what they're bringing in as value to your organization and really embrace what each person brings into the organization. And I personally love helping young people succeed. So I'm a professional speaker. That's how I make my living. I'm always mentoring and helping younger people that want to get into my industry. And I think that my age group has a responsibility to kind of pass the torch down to the next generation that are coming in. So, and I have to say, I'm really surprised nobody asked about technology and AI. It's because that's the one everyone really seems to be quite scared of in the future. And it's the one that I believe the younger folks that would be on this call are really going to benefit from.
Awesome. We did just get one last minute question. We speak of the well-known generations, and that's great. However, we often don't speak of the adopted generation, those of us who were raised by our community, not a specific generation or persons, those who took a little from everyone and grew a little differently from our peers. How do you reach those that fell between the generations?
So that's actually adopted generations are not a generation. That is more of a cultural background. So what was my culture growing up? Was I adopted? Was I raised by different people? Demographics when it comes to age is very specific, that the characteristics are based on when they were born. And this is where the outliers. So maybe an adopted person may have been influenced by people and change their characteristics, and they may not fit into the bucket as much. But the reality is it's based on, and I'll give you an example. Millennials are known as a slow generation. Now, a lot of millennials are going to, I think you have a birthday. Don't you have a birthday coming up? And you're a millennial, right? So
I'm a Gen Z, actually.
oh, you're Gen Z. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're actually noted as a slow generation as well. So you would think, oh, that's bad. But what it really means is you're slow to do things in your life. So you're slower to get married, slower to have children, slower to move into your careers. And that's based on your age. And now, if you say we're adopted and grew up somewhere different, you will have different characteristics based on that. And then you'll be known as an outlier. So for example, I'm not going to say your age, but say you were 22 years old and you're in university. I got married when I was 21 years old, fell in love with my wife. We're still married today. We dated since we were in junior high school. So the same person, the only person I've ever been with in my life. So at the time, my friends were getting married at 21 years old because that was what we did. So if you're 21, 22 years old right now and you fall in love, or you want to fall in love and get married and have children, the pool of resources that would be of the same mindset to you would be a lot less than when I was that age. So not to say that you couldn't fall in love and get married at 21 years old, but the amount of spouses or partners out there that are looking for the same thing would be reduced. So being adopted or growing up in a different environment will influence you as an outlier, maybe make you a little bit different. That's your cultural background, not so much age. But I love the question. Nobody's ever asked that before. Actually, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we got some good questions this time around.
Yeah.
So that's everything we have for the Q&A portion. So I'm going to hand us back to Tracy for some closing remarks.
So thank you very much, Eddie. Very interesting topic again. We had some good questions, as you said, and yeah, I'm a baby boomer and working with the younger generations. I really don't have a plan to retire either because I love what I'm doing.
Exactly.
As long as I'm challenged by that, I think it's great. And you're right. I have a lot of friends that they retired, but they just went and got another job, like a
Yes.
part-time job, more that they could fit into their lifestyle, work a little here, work a little there. But very interesting to look at all of the generations and how we work together. So thank you very much for that. Thank you everyone for participating today. We really appreciate it. Next month, we will be having William Yan, who will be here. Great guy, lots of talking for him. He loves to talk about his subject, especially on how foods are regulated. So it'll be another interesting topic. And we invite you all to please join up and join us again at the end of September. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eddie.